Hello, everyone. My name is Laura Chekuratova. I am the artistic director of Salon de Virtuosi, and I'm very excited to introduce you today to a young pianist. Her name is Hilda Huang, and she's going to perform in our upcoming Beethoven celebration and a holiday concert, which we're going to stream on the Violin channel and on the Salon's YouTube channel on Beethoven's birthday, December 17 at 7 p.m. So please save that date. That's a very important date in music history, the birth of one of the greatest geniuses who ever lived. And we are doing a great celebration. Hilda is going to play. We also have Randall Gooseby perform the Kreutzer Sonata. So it will be a beautiful evening with lots of great music. Hilda, how are you? It's so nice to see you next to your beautiful piano.
I'm doing great. It really is a lovely instrument. I feel like I learn a lot when I play on a very good instrument.
Yes, that's absolutely true. I know, let's get right into your history with instruments, because I know that you have played traditional or original instruments like harpsichord and clavichord and modern piano. So how does it feel to perform Beethoven on a modern piano in comparison to the instrument that he had, which changed quite a bit, right, in his lifetime? So can we talk a little about this different kinds of keyboards and pianos?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one of the biggest differences between modern pianos and with historical forte pianos of Beethoven's time is that the rate at which the volume of a note when you press it down reaches its maximum point and the rate at which it decays is quite different. This whole process is sped up innumerably in a historical piano. And also, the notes in general are just a little bit quieter, the action's a little lighter, and that enables the pianist in general to play faster with more articulation and with a little bit of a wider range of, I call it texture. The texture of the playing is built into the instrument. The modern piano, in comparison, is very smooth. The sound blossoms slowly to a very nice peak, and then it sustains for much longer. And these characteristics place certain interpretive restrictions on how you play when you play on a modern piano versus on a forte piano. And so having the knowledge that comes from playing on the old instrument informs but doesn't determine how you play it on a modern instrument. So that's the key little thing that I think leaves a bit open, leaves the door open for the modern performer to keep playing Beethoven on modern piano. And that's part of my motivation to do it too.
Yes, one of the things that is interesting, and because I also tried once to play on a forte piano, Beethoven actually, is that it's harder to make slow legato lines, which the modern piano allows us. And sometimes you kind of crave that in the music. But I guess you do it in other ways. In general, the tempi are a little bit quicker, even for slow movements, right? When you play on a fortepiano.
And you bring up a great point, because actually one of the things that Beethoven was most revered for as a pianist, he was a really fantastic pianist. And one of the things he was most revered for was for making these long lines, for making endless phrases, legato singing tone. We don't usually think of this. This is in contrast to Mozart, whose playing has been described as being choppy, and is quite different from modern notions of what good sound is on modern piano. So we can recognize this aspect of modernity in Beethoven's performance already.
Yeah, so he was seeking those kind of long lines that the music is kind of implying even. Um, he was also very fascinated with the pedal, right? He used it in a way that's very different from previous composers. Um, uh, can you talk a little bit about the difference in, let's say, in the Waldstein Sonata, if you press the pedal down in the beginning of the third movement, um, on a modern piano, after a while, you kind of need to secretly start changing it or adjusting it because it just gets too much, right? How about on the fortepiano if you do it? the way he wrote it, which is a very long pedal, pretty much like the
That's right. So to clarify, the pedal is basically held through the entire first and second phrases of the last movement of the Waldstein Sonata, which to modern pianists is unthinkable. Our teachers would all tell us that it's too muddy, it's dirty. We
yeah.
have to pedal, you're saying. But on forte piano, the magical thing is that because the sustain of each note is a little shorter, you can in fact literally hold the pedal down for, what is it, 10, 12 seconds, and it produces this really radiant, magical sound. Um, and coupled with another kind of pedal that Beethoven really exploited, the una corda effect, which he then put on for the entire second movement in the fourth concerto, for instance, and then in the sonata that I'm going to play, the Opus 101 sonata, he also puts it down for the entirety of the third movement. The combination of the una corda quietness, it kind of dulls the sound, it rounds it a little bit, and the ability for the note to sustain for, or actually I should rather say the ability for the pedal to sustain a note for longer, I think produces a very characteristic effect of Beethoven's music. So that's something that is on my mind when I play this sonata that I'm going to play for you.
Fantastic. You are playing the Sonata Opus 101 and also a Fantasy by Beethoven. Can you tell us a little bit more about the Fantasy?
Sure. Yeah, the Fantasy is quite an unusual piece. I can't really think of another Beethoven piece that's quite like it. It starts in one key and it ends in another, which already is quite unusual for its time. And well, you'll understand when you hear it, but it's a wild piece.
Yeah.
Every section is different. Every section is characteristic. And at first, it might seem that there's no logic connecting the sections, which then leads me to believe that this really is an exercise in succession or improvisation, and the activity of the imaginating manifesting itself in the playing, which means it's extremely liberating for the performer because we get to just bare our soul, as it's as if whatever happens just comes out through the instrument. And one of the great things I think about Beethoven as a composer of piano music was that he was so intimately connected with the experience of playing the instrument. And especially in a piece like the Fantasy, the reward and the fruit of that connection really comes out in the style of the writing. Fast scales, they would have been idiomatic at the time, but they're used in such a way that was quite radical and extreme. You don't necessarily see in most composers from the 17th century one diminished scale down, and then another one down. That's a very striking effect. And so I hope this will be a very stimulating piece to listen to.
Yes, it's really quite something what he does. Pretty much with all of his pieces, people like to talk about him having three periods: the early, the middle, and then the late period. But I feel like with his very first piece that he published, Opus 1, number 1, he's already breaking boundaries in terms of length of the piece and in terms of the dynamic range, in terms of the amount of fortissimos he's putting in there, and pianissimos, and really trying to explore new universes. It's just wonderful to have this opportunity to talk about this great master, especially because this whole year has been so difficult in terms of so many performances of Beethoven have been canceled that I almost feel like now it's time for us to celebrate him online, but hopefully next year we can kind of extend the celebration so that a lot of these live events can come back. I remember actually one of the last concerts I heard, I went to Carnegie Hall and I heard Beethoven played on period instruments with John Elliott Gardner, and that was very, very fascinating. Again, lots of fast tempos, lots of brisk and joyful interpretations, and quite different than you would hear on a modern orchestra.
Yeah, absolutely. I like that word that you used, joyous. That is certainly something that I feel can be encapsulated in the lightness of the period sound as we think of it.
Yeah, Absolutely. So, for our audience who are getting to know you, I would like to mention a little bit about your biography. You went to Yale, where you studied with my colleague and friend Melvin Chen. Actually, Melvin and I both studied with Seymour Lipkin at Juilliard, and he was one of those special musicians who also studied violin. He was double major in violin and piano, and he also studied chemistry. Um, and now I found out that you also have a degree in chemistry,
I
which
do.
is just unbelievable. I'm so very impressed by this. And especially someone from my background, because in Eastern Europe, where I grew up, people were very, from a young age, they were very highly specialized. So if you study music, it's almost unthinkable of you to study anything else, let alone chemistry. So, how did you juggle all this time, getting into the science and the music, which is in itself kind of like science, and requires all of this time and dedication to learn?
Well, that's a big question. I mean, I can speak to only the experiences that I've lived because I know Melvin has had different experiences than I have. But for me, it was very difficult. I won the Leipzig Bach competition the summer after my freshman year in college, which was just about the time when I would have been pursuing science more seriously if had I were I to go into that as a profession in then future. Um, and after the competition, I then had to play concerts, which I wasn't really prepared for. I had never done it before. And so it was a little bit like both things turning onto high gear at the same time. And it was quite an overwhelming experience. But being inundated with so much demand meant that it required me to choose. And after a while, it just became clear that music was what I was, when I woke up in the morning, I would practice before I would study, or I would go to the piano before dinner, or I would push studying after dinner. Little things like that tipped me off. And so since then, it's really been a process of coming to terms with myself and understanding that even though I do have other interests, it's also a very meaningful thing to make the commitment like you would have had to do since a very young age to a certain field of study. Now, that isn't to say that science hasn't really enriched my thinking in many ways. Right now, I'm doing a lot of work on the history of theory. I've just been learning a lot about these subjects, and that has really motivated, well, it's really come together in forming some thought about how piano pedagogy works, how we understand performance, and also what we've been talking a little bit about earlier in this conversation, which is performance practice. And understanding the structures that go into that kind of communication that hold together modern classical music society and traditions and practices. All of that abstract thinking comes much in line with the abstract thinking that you need in science. And so having different outlets in which to practice those intellectual skills is definitely fun.
Yeah. And I'm not surprised that you are in the prestigious doctoral program at the Juilliard School. You just started there this fall. I'm sure that you're a dream student there. So tell me a little bit about how the program is going online, because again, I did that program many years ago in the early 2000s. And that time we spent pretty much the whole time, the first year, in the library because we were learning various research skills. Um, and I imagine that a lot of this information is now much more easy to access online, right? But do you still do these funny exercises where you have to figure out the pathway to a question? And the question is something, for example, how did Beethoven prepare his coffee? Um, or the question is, when was the first recital in a balloon?
I've heard about that. It's the scavenger hunt for knowledge.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we don't get to do that in person, and neither do we get physical reward for it. No cookie trail, nothing
Yeah.
like that.
No, but I'm sure now you can just Google it. But back then, we had to go through a whole process of research, kind of like getting those exactly like a scavenger hunt. And it took a long time. And after a while, it started to get easier. But, it started with a question and it ended with the book where you had the answer.
Sounds kind of fun. It's a little bit like night at the museum, but at the library.
Yes, exactly. In the research library and the Juilliard Library, they have a fantastic collection of manuscripts, and we were able to look at those as well. So hopefully soon. Are you able to access the library now at all, or how
Actually,
is Juilliard?
closed. We have to request materials for curbside pickup. But other than that, I have to say I'm enjoying working from home.
Yes, yeah. So you have more time to practice and do other things. What other classes are you taking now?
So the two introductory doctoral classes are the one that you just mentioned, which is an introduction to research skills. And the other one is kind of a survey of the first, what we often think of as like the first half of history of theory. So theory up until about Remo. So I was just reading Remo this morning. And then aside from that, I'm doing some coursework in historical performance and taking harpsichord lessons on the side.
Terrific.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think these are new programs. I think the old music program is relatively new at Julian. I think it's wonderful that they have it and that pianists can learn, as opposed to just getting on an instrument. And our technique is so different than if you just start playing harpsichord with the arms and it start to sound like you're throwing stuff in furniture in the instrument. And even if you watch harpsichord players, it just looks quite different physically than the way we play. Uh,
Yeah. For them, quiet hands is the motto.
yes, yeah, and
And
very,
and
very
talking.
precise. Yeah. Oh, fantastic. So, what else is ahead for you after this Beethoven celebration? You're recording the concert especially for Salon de Virtuosi. You're going to be tomorrow at the Kosciuszko Foundation, and then we'll stream it on the 17th. Any other exciting recordings or events happening in the coming months?
Well, originally there was going to be a very, very exciting one, which would have been a performance of the Beethoven Fourth Concerto with the San Francisco Chamber Orchestra. I was scheduled to do their annual New Year's gala concert. It's sort of a 3-day affair. But unfortunately, just yesterday, I found out that because of increasing case numbers, it's not going to be possible. So we have postponed it. And like you were saying earlier on in our conversation, it will happen next year.
Exactly. We'll just keep celebrating Beethoven for a long time. Well, I'm going to let you go. I know you have a class to go to. Thank you so much for stopping by and talking to me today. I'm sure our audience will look forward to meeting you in person, either at one of our Salon de Virtuosi events or many other opportunities that are yet to come for us in this wonderful city. I wish you happy holidays, and I wish everyone a really, really joyous holiday season. And the future is bright. We will be together again, and we will play music and celebrate
Sounds
this wonderful
great.
platform. Yay! Okay, good luck.
Bye
Take care.
bye.